Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Stephen Aquario. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Association of Counties. With me here today is the Honorable William Farber, the Chairman of the Board of Hamilton County Board of Supervisors in the heart of the Adirondack region of New York State. Today is Monday, October 23rd, and we're here to discuss some issues important to county governments and to the people of New York State all across this state. But let me first thank the President of the Capital District Regional Off-Track Betting Corporation, John Signer, the Board of Directors of the Capital District OTB, which are comprised of county officials from all across this region, the areas of Albany County, Columbia, Cortland, Clinton, Essex, Franklin, Greene, Herkimer, Madison, Montgomery, Oneida, Rensselaer, St. Lawrence, Warren, and Washington County. We're here today on behalf of the counties of New York who have a long-standing relationship with the Capital District OTB franchises. We've helped form them, we help fund them with non-tax revenues, and President Signer has offered the OTB studios here as a platform to discuss some issues which are important and relevant to you as our viewers here today. I thought we'd take this opportunity to talk about a very important constitutional ballot initiative that will be important to the residents of the Adirondack and Catskill Mountain Preserves. There's 3 ballot proposals that will be on the ballot which you'll be voting on this November. The first one of these questions will ask New Yorkers about a constitutional convention. Shall the people of New York State have a constitutional convention? If a majority of New Yorkers vote yes, well, that would mean that a delegates would be selected. 3 delegates from every senatorial district would be elected by the people of New York State, and these 200 and some odd delegates would then convene in Albany and examine your form, our form of government in New York State. And that would then go back with the work product that these delegates put together and develop, and that work product would then go back to us as the people of New York and go for another vote in 2019. There is a second constitutional ballot question. Shall a pension be forfeited by a certain public official who is convicted of a certain felony? Again, these are amendments to the state's constitution which are to be approved or rejected by the people of New York State this coming November. But there's a third ballot question, which is really the main purpose of why we came to you today, and that's to talk about the creation of a land bank account of up to 250 acres of forest preserve land for the Adirondack and Catskill regions of New York State. And with me here today is the Honorable William Farber, the Chairman of the Board of the Hamilton County Board of Supervisors. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As you pointed out, this is an important ballot question for the Adirondacks and Catskills. And that's 16 counties within New York State that are impacted by this amendment, and many, many towns particularly as well. This ballot proposal it sets up a bank of land very similar to what the state did some 60 years ago for New York State Department of Transportation. This is a 250-acre bank of land that is great for the environment in terms of it's replaced before even the first fraction of an acre can be used. It's replaced by 250 acres of land that does have recreational value, does have environmental value for the forest preserve. So this is really good for the forest preserve. It's a win for the environmental community, but it allows for us to address some really practical problems on the local government side. You know, safety is so important to our constituency, and one of the things that we see is included in this is safe drinking water. And you only have to follow the news to know how important safe drinking water is to all of the constituency within New York State, within our communities. We've got issues like a closed bridge in the town of Horicon, where the bridge remains closed, waiting for this amendment to be implemented so that they can actually do the bridge replacement problem. When you think about the way some of our communities have really been impacted by some of the severe weather that we've seen, when you've got a community that is struggling to recover from washed out culvert pipes, a washed out bridge, and we're now building, as you know, Steve, for 500-year floods, not 100-year floods. So that changes the infrastructure that you're putting in. That's bigger culvert pipes, that's redesigned bridges with greater bridge abutments and the like. And because of that, you end up needing 5 extra feet on this side of the road, 2 extra feet on that side of the road. The utilization of the DOT land bank has showed these are fractional acreages that are necessary, but without these acreages, projects can't go forward, or if they do go forward, they end up poorly designed. This is really something that will help with that. This is an unintended consequence of the forest preserve. You have to keep in context that our Catskill and Adirondack forest preserves are really not traditional parks. They're not like the national parks in that, yes, there's 3 million acres of preserved lands roughly between the Adirondacks and Catskills, but within those 3 million acres, there's also private land, there's communities, there's the amenities that people that travel to the Adirondacks and Catskills depend upon, from gas stations to the restaurant to the people that live there, to volunteer firemen and EMS personnel. I myself have been an EMT for many, many years. I've been on the fire department. I've been assistant chief of the fire department. All of these communities are impacted by our inability to have safe drinking water, to have safe roads and bridges, to have safe culvert pipes. And we think this amendment has really been constructed in a way that, on the first part, protects the environment. It creates an environmental win for the Adirondacks and Catskills by replacing the land before even a fraction can be used, replacing the land with the kind of property that sportsmen and environmentalists and people can really enjoy and recreate on. And in exchange for that, the communities are able to take these slivers of land as necessary to address health and safety problems within the communities. I think that's why, if you look at the coalition of people that have come together in support of this, you see a broad cross-section of people. We've got a website for this, Vote Yes for the Adirondacks. And if you look on there, you've got all 4 Adirondack environmental groups. You've got national and international environmental groups like the Nature Conservancy. You got the New York League of Conservation Voters. You got a broad cross-section. You also have the sporting community. You have the business community. You've got the North Country Chamber and the Adirondack Chamber. And the list goes on and on. Add to that all the local governments that you and I are here to talk about and advocate for today. We all have a shared vested interest in getting a yes vote on this amendment, but it certainly is a challenge. The one thing you didn't mention in talking about the 3 ballot proposals is we need the voters to understand that these ballot proposals are on the back of the ballot. And so, you have to go into the polling place, you have to make a conscious effort, not only that to make yourself knowledgeable in advance what these 3 very separate and distinct proposals are, but that you need to flip over the ballot so that you can take advantage of your opportunity to make this decision.
I'm Stephen Aquario. We're from the New York State Association of Counties. We are talking to you all today about the Constitution of the State of New York and why it's important to local governments, why it's important to our citizens. I'm joined with the Honorable William Farber, the chairman of the board of the Hamilton County Board of Supervisors in the heart of the Adirondack region. Bill, are you concerned a little bit about how the voters of New York will treat the 3 ballot questions? Is there some concern that some folks have an opinion more or less about propositions 1 and 2 and may vote accordingly on proposition number 3 with that same bias that they may walk into that voting booth, or not a bias, but maybe a personal belief that they think is one way or the other? Can you talk a little bit about why it's important? And you mentioned it a minute ago, to perhaps separate these ballot proposals.
Steve, I think that's a great point, and I think it's something some of us are concerned with. You see many times people go to the polling place with the mindset of, I'm going to support this candidate, or in this case, vote for or against this ballot proposal.
Or a
that's
party
on the
affiliation. They may go across the board.
And so you've got people walking in that may or may not have heard particularly of proposal number 3. New York State has a very unique means of protecting the forest preserve. And this amendment helps support Article 14 and the constitutional protections of the Forest Preserve by dealing with very separate and discrete problems that really give us the ability to strengthen Article 14, not weaken it. You've heard a lot of the debate, I'm sure, about a constitutional convention and how would it impact employees and how would it impact Article 14 and sort of that uncertainty of what people perceive as the nuclear effect of opening up the Constitution in this broad way. I think when you look at proposals number 2 and 3, they're so distinctly different from Proposal 1. In that Proposal 1 obviously deals with the Constitution, and so do 2 and 3, but 2 and 3 demonstrate the other means for amending the Constitution. You can either open it up through a convention, or the legislature through successive passages of resolutions can put separate, distinct, individual vetted questions on the ballot for the consideration of the voters of the people of the state of New York. That's what you see in Proposal 2 and 3, and I think our concern is whether or not the media is talking enough about that, whether we're talking enough about that, whether we've really been successful in getting out to the voters of the state of New York that there are 3 proposals that represent very different means of dealing with constitutional questions that are on the back of the ballot. You've got the convention, and then you've got 2 discrete amendments that fix very specific problems that the legislature, frankly, the legislature in our case passed unanimously, both houses, very bipartisan. We got bipartisan passage, unanimous passage, 2 successive years with implementing language in place that also passed unanimously.
We're talking about the Constitution of the state of New York and why it matters to all of us as New Yorkers to take the time, vote this year, look at the backside of that paper ballot, because there's 3 very important questions for New Yorkers and only New Yorkers to answer. And that is, shall we amend the Constitution of the state of New York and call a constitutional convention? Shall a public official's pension be forfeited should he or she be convicted of a felony? And the 3rd ballot question here, really an environmental land bank, and we're talking with William Farber from Hamilton County. Bill, it seems to me that this is a very thoughtful, a very deliberative process that was crafted, this piece of legislation. How does the Constitution get amended? Did a member of the New York State Senate introduce this and a member of the Assembly? How does that work? And the second part of that question is, how do the Adirondack local governments feel about this issue themselves? These are units of government that help serve the people, provide public services throughout the Adirondack region. The process by which, if it was passed, and then the reaction of the Adirondack local governments.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you asking that question, because I think this particular ballot proposal, Proposal 3, really articulates the way in a perfect world people would like to see their government function, in that this was a grassroots coalition that came together within the Adirondacks to talk about this particular problem. There's nobody on any side of the environmental spectrum, any side of the business, any side of the local government spectrum that wants to see people's health and safety risk by virtue of an unintended consequence. And so we had such a broad, diverse group that came together initially through something called the Common Ground Forum, which is over 200 people that convene every July to talk about issues of consequence to the Adirondacks. And so we really fleshed this out. We began to put meat on the bones at that grassroots level. We carried that issue then on behalf of the Common Ground Alliance and local government and the environmental community to Albany, and Albany engaged between the Assembly and the Senate. Senator Little was very key on this, but Assemblyman Engelbright really stepped up.
He's the chair of the Assembly's Environmental Commission.
He is the chair, and I was going to add, he's an assemblyman from Long Island, but he took a very real interest in this. He came to the Adirondacks. He spent time this summer learning about the issues, trying to be helpful. But this is how I think the people really expect their government to work.
Right.
The problem gets identified. The 2 houses of the legislature come together. They work with stakeholders to craft a solution. And then it ultimately gets bipartisan support and this unifying support from that grassroots constituency, because we got it right. We figured out how to create an environmental win. We figured out how to fix a problem, and we figured out how to fix a problem with no new taxes and no new fees.
Yeah, that's important for New York. Yeah.
It absolutely is, and it's amazing how suspicious people are of their governmental units. And I think at the town and county level, we have the distinct advantage of being so close to the electorate. We're one of them. As I say, I'm an EMT, I'm a fireman, I respond to those calls. When a call is, when the response time is increased because there's a bridge out and you have fire apparatus and an ambulance that has to go, we're the people that actually see that firsthand.
Talk a little bit about how the local governments reacted to this ballot proposal in the Adirondack region.
Absolutely. The local governments are excited about this, as you can appreciate. And I talked a little bit about a bridge in the town of Horicon that's closed, that can't be replaced. We've got another example that I think would be compelling for New Yorkers if more people were aware of it. In the town of Fine, they did a full rehab of their water system, and there's about a 200-foot section of road right-of-way that physically crosses the forest preserve. And what that means is that basically, as you know, a right-of-way doesn't own that piece of property in fee, so the underlying property underneath that road right-of-way, underneath the paved road, underneath the shoulder, underneath the ditch line, is forest preserve. Because of that, the community of Fine was unable to replace that section of water line. So you've got brand new water line connecting to the old water line and brand new water line running from that, and yet you've got this old piece of water main in between because of the barrier created, because of this unintended consequence.
So this is a public health, a public safety ballot for the people of the Adirondacks. We did it right in the 1800s when we created these forest preserves, but it sounds like we're doing it right now by thoughtfully amending this process to help the people that live there, the millions of tourists that come into this region every year, summer, fall, winter, to have access to public safety, public health, drinking water you mentioned. Bill, we've got just a few minutes left. Let's talk about why folks in Cortland County, folks in Albany County, Rensselaer County, these are communities that are not in the Adirondack or the Catskill Forest Preserve areas. Why or people from New York City that might happen to view this, why should people all across this state vote yes for this ballot proposal? Maybe they think it doesn't necessarily apply to them. So if you can really give a good reason to our viewers why this matters to folks across the state.
I appreciate that, Steve, and I think you started to touch on why it's important to everybody across New York State by virtue of the fact that we all have a very real interest in the forest preserve, Adirondacks and Catskills. We tour there, we're part of the sporting community, we're part of a group that supports it. I think structurally, because we've got this constitutional protection, it stands that all the voters across the state of New York have a say in these issues about the forest preserve. That's really the richness and the beauty of the protection that Article 14 requires for the forest preserve. We're required to test, even a minuscule impact like this is required to be approved by all of the voters of the state of New York. Think about it in the context of 3 million acres of forest preserve, 250 acres in small slivers, fractions of acres being removed. The DOT land bank I mentioned has been in place for 60 years. We all depend on those DOT roads for safe travel, safe corridor through and from the park. That's functioned for 60 years, used about 250 acres of land. This isn't something we dreamed up. This has a tested pattern of use that works. This works well. And frankly, this is, as I said, this strengthens and protects Article 14 because it doesn't seek to do anything to remove the protections of Article 14. It simply gives, through an environmental review process, a community the opportunity to access a sliver of land. But I think it's been tested many, many times how dearly environmental principles are really held by the voters of the state of New York. Time and time again, voters turn out in large numbers when they're aware of them to vote on these ballot proposals around the Adirondacks and Catskills. I myself have been involved in several ballot proposals related to the Adirondacks, and each time I find myself talking to voters that were just not aware of this really, really unique protection that's in place. This is spectacular. There isn't another state in the union that has a constitutional protection for their forest preserve, for their parklands. We protect it that way in New York because it is such a highly coveted piece of New York lore. And frankly, for the communities of the Adirondacks, it's the golden goose.
It is.
We care as much about the environment, we care as much about the forest preserve, we care as much about protecting that as anybody in the state. It's really about how do you bridge these small gaps? How do you overcome the inability of a community to replace a bridge for 3 years because you need to go through the process, absent having a tool in place proactively that allows us to do these kinds of repairs.
If you're tuning in just now, we've been talking about the need to get out and vote. In particular, check the ballot box on the back of your paper ballot. There are 3 constitutional issues that the people of New York State will have to address. We're talking with William Farber, the chair of the Hamilton County Board of Supervisors in the heart of the Adirondacks. I'm Stephen Aquario of the New York Association of Counties, really providing a public service announcement, if you will, about why it's important to look at these ballot questions for New Yorkers to choose. We've talked about ballot number 3 in particular on the show, trying to encourage our viewers here today, Bill, to select this ballot, check yes as an issue of public safety, being able to fix infrastructure. Bill, you've mentioned bridge projects, road, the ability to apply to a land bank, if you will, to add certain infrastructure projects. We've talked about public health issues of drinking water access. Is there some review board, some process for review of which projects will happen
Absolutely.
through this process? Was that considered in this ballot question as well?
Absolutely, and Steve, that's why we worked with the legislature this last spring to make sure that the implementing language was in place before this ballot proposal went before the voters. Because I think we all understand how sensitive the voters are to New York State to the unknown. They want to make sure that they understand exactly what they're voting for and exactly the process. And so there are a sequence of decision points that are embedded in that implementing legislation that should give assurance to everybody that there is a process in place, that this land won't be used willy-nilly. I think, I hate to keep going back to it, but I think it does bode well for being able to demonstrate success around this, that DOT's had a similar land bank that has basically used fractional acres here, there, over a 60-year period, not quite getting to the point of using 250 acres yet. Everything about this amendment and the implementing language is constructed in a way that's intended to promote the conservative use of this acreage, including but not limited to the local government in the first instance being able to establish that there is no alternative. There's no alternative means to using this quarter acre, this eighth of an acre. If you've got an existing, I think a lot of people, when they think of the forest preserve, they don't think of the fact that a water line literally along a stabilized shoulder but in front of the ditch line is forest preserve. They think that's part of the road right away. There isn't the inherent ability, absent this amendment, to treat infrastructure utilities within the road right-of-way as a legal use and therefore just be able to repair it. So there's those kinds of uses that don't even change the space that's impacted. It's simply tied to the use. But I think moreover on the use side, you have to demonstrate there's no alternative. DEC and the Adirondack Park Agency have to review that determination to make sure that this is sound logic. You have to have the engineering designs that show why you need that extra 4 feet of bridge abutment, why it's more important to come back into the bank of the stream further to protect against another washout. So there's plenty of means in place here. And look, local government officials, we're going to compensate the Department of Environmental Conservation based on fair market value for this land as it comes out of the land bank. That money is also going to go into a pool of money that the department can use to buy additional acreage above and beyond the 250 acres that originally come into the forest preserve. So this is a win on so many levels, and the protections and the tools have been put in place to make sure that each and every time this gets used, it gets used in a conservative way, only for the types of projects that are specifically articulated in the amendment and in the implementing language. It's bike paths, it's water wells for safe drinking water, it's being able to repair a culvert or a bridge in a timely fashion, not having a road closed for 2 years. When you think about what's involved with a community having to recover from a devastating storm, think about how much more frustrating it would be for the community to have to wait 3 years to get an amendment to be able to do the repair correctly. I don't think there's any voter in the state of New York, whether they care about the forest reserve, whether they're a sportsman, whomever, that would want to subject a community to that. I think this is the right thing to do, and I'm really pleased to have a chance to talk about it.
Thank you. Bill Farber, the chairman of the Board of Supervisors in Hamilton County, New York, in the heart of the Adirondacks. Bill, you've made a very successful case why this ballot initiative should be voted yes. You've got 2 yes votes right here at this table, and we encourage all of you across the state to vote yes on this important environmental land bank for the Adirondack and the Catskill Forest Preserves this election day, November of 2017. I'd like to thank all of you for listening to this presentation here today. Thank all of you for being subscribers of the Capital District Regional Off-Track Betting Corporation. This has been a viewpoint from the sponsors of the Capital District Regional Off-Track Betting Corporation, the county governments of New York State. Thank you very much.